Another important elasticity of demand that we look at in economics is called the cross elasticity of demand, or XED. This is the elasticity of demand which is looking at a relationship between two goods. So, what is XED? XED is simply the responsiveness of demand for one good to a change in price of another good. In other words, it is looking at, if we look at the formula, the formula says this, it is looking at percentage change in quantity demanded of one good, good A or good X in our case, over percentage change in price of good B or good Y. So we're looking at good relationship between good X and good Y. If the price of good Y changes, what will happen to good X? Now, in the earlier chapters that we did on demand, we look at sometimes goods are interrelated. They could be substitutes, they could be complements, and sometimes they're completely unrelated as well. So cross elastic demand is a good measure for us to look at how demand changes when goods are interrelated. For example, like Coke and Pepsi are substitutes. So we'll see how substitutes relationship can be seen through cross elasticity demand. Similarly, tea and milk are complements, and therefore they also have a relationship that can be figured out through cross elasticity of demand. So the sign here will matter a lot. So when you look at this formula, we'll soon see the sign of XCD, if it's positive or negative, will play a strong role. So let's start off with the first example, and let's look, say if XCD is positive or greater than 0. Well, if XCD is greater than 0, then the two goods X and Y are substitutes to each other. Like for example, Coke and Pepsi. They are good solid substitutes to each other, meaning that they are in competition with each other, or they are in competitive demand. And if one good becomes more expensive, then the consumer can switch to others. So in other words, if you look at the formula of XCD, which is saying percentage change in quantity demanded of good X or percentage change in price of good Y, then if good X is, let's say, Pepsi, and good Y is Coke, so if price of Coke goes up, we know this, that people will buy less of Coke, so quantity demanded of Coke will fall, but at the same time people are going to switch. So therefore what we'll see, that the demand for Pepsi will go up. If the demand for Pepsi goes up, this means the numerator has what we call, because the price is going up, has a positive sign. At the same time, denominator also has what we call a positive sign, as both are rising, because when the price of Coke goes up, we are finding the demand for Pepsi to also goes up. So that means that both the numerator and denominator has a positive sign, which means that if XCD is positive, then you will see the good to be substitutes. As price of one good goes up, the demand for the other good also goes up as people are switching. Let's do a numerical example just to also see how numbers look like. So for example, if I say that price of Coke goes up by, for example, 20%, okay, and let's say as a result the demand for Pepsi, so D Pepsi, goes up by, for example, 30%. This means my value of XCD will be positive 30% over positive 20%, or in other words, plus 1.5. Now, this means not only demand for Pepsi is going up, but it's also going up by much more, because the value of XCD is again exceeding by more than 1. In other words, percentage change in quantity demanded in this case is greater than percentage change in price of the other good. This means that they not only are substitute because the sign is positive, but also because the value is more than 1. We will call it a strong substitute, because the relationship is such that whenever the price of Coke is going up, the demand for Pepsi is going up by much more. So let me write this there, that whenever the value of XCD is greater than 1 and positive, of course, then we're looking at a strong substitute. And similarly, by the way, if this value was not 1.5, what if this value was, for example, what if this value was like a positive zero point 0.5? Now, in that case, if this value was a positive zero point 0.5, positive means there's a sign indicates that these goods are still substitutes, but zero point 0.5, the value means this is an example of a weak substitute, because we will only have this kind of a situation when the percentage change in quantity is is less than your percentage change in price, and that's why the value is less than 1, like a zero point 0.5. So what I'm trying to say here is that while the sign tells us the relationship, the value is telling us the strength of the relationship. Similarly, guys, what if XCD is less than 0? Well, if XCD is less than 0, we say that this means that XCD is negative, which means the two goods are complements to each other, which means they are jointly demanded. So what are complements? For example, tea and milk are complements to each other, or DVD and DVD players were complement to each other. So what does that mean? That if the price of one good goes up, for example, if the price of cars go up, then automatically people will drive less cars. So quantity, or buy less cars, because cars are becoming expensive. Quantity of cars demanded will go down. Now a complement to cars is petrol. So what will happen to demand for petrol? Well, the demand for petrol will go down. Why? Because now people are driving less cars. As a result of that, the complement will be not demanded that much, which means that if you look at the formula, the percentage change in quantity demanded of good X, in this case we are looking at petrol, over percentage change in price of good Y, let's say cars, will have a negative relationship, because on one hand you're looking at the price of cars to go up, so there's a positive sign here, but at the same time demand for petrols are going down, is going down, so there is a negative sign here, and that would mean my XCD is actually going to be less than 0 or negative. So whenever XCD is negative, we say two goods are complements to each other, which would mean that when the price of one goods go up, you will see the demand for the other good to go down. Now in this case also, guys, the value matters a lot. What if your XCD is such that the value of XCD in this case is a minus 1.5? So if it's a minus 1.5, this means a minus sign. The sign is telling us the relationship, which we know. The negative would mean it is a complement, but the same time the 1.5 would mean that XCD is greater than 1, which means it's a strong complement. So whenever the value is more than 1, the relationship is strong, and the sign will tell us whether it's a strong complement or a strong substitute. In this case, because it's a negative 1.5, I'll call it a strong complement. Similarly, what if the value of this car and petrol was, for example, something like a minus 0.5? Now minus 0.5 would mean that this is going to be what we call a weak complement, right? So when you have a minus 0.5, this means that when the price goes up, quantity is going down for the other good, but at the same time, because it's 0.5, this means the quantity is not going down by that much, and that's why the relationship is weak rather than strong. What if, for example, your value of XCD turns out to be 0? If XCD is 0, this means basically that two goods are completely unrelated to each other. Remember one thing, that when you have a 0, 0 is neither positive nor negative, but a 0 would mean that the value is such that there is no relationship between two goods. For example, if the price of cars go up, what will happen to demand for apples? And the answer is probably nothing, because they do not have any connection with each other. What can be followed from this discussion, therefore, is this, that the further away from 0 XCD is, the stronger will be the relationship between the goods. And also, like, the closer to zero XED is, be it positive or negative, absolutely means be it positive or negative, the weaker will be the relation between the two goods. So the closer you are towards zero, the weaker the relationship, be it negative or positive. The further away you are from zero, the stronger will be the relationship between two goods. Let's now look at the relevance of XED. XED is very useful for us. Just like other elasticities of demand, XED tells us the relationship between two goods. So when I look at XED, for example, first usefulness is that it can help us in our pricing policy changes. For example, Coke and Pepsi are two goods that we can say are closely related to each other. They are what we call substitutes, but not only substitutes, they are close substitutes to each other. So the higher the XED, we know the greater the relationship between two goods, and therefore the greater will be producer's reaction to the pricing strategy of another good. So, for example, if the price of substitute increases, a firm may react to this by maintaining its price in order to increase sales. So, for example, if Pepsi decides to increase the price, Coke would react by doing nothing to its price, and that way, a lot of people will find Coke to be cheaper, and that will make the sales for Coke to go up. Another great usefulness of XED is when goods are kind of like interrelated, and we know that goods are interrelated to each other by looking at the value of XED. Then firms are also looking at marketing strategy. For example, if Coke decides to market more, Pepsi may do the same. So, if, for example, one firm decides to increase this marketing budget, for example, Coke does that in, let's say, a World Cup that is about to come, or for example, any big sporting event that is about to come, Pepsi would try to do the same in order to make sure they do not lose market share as compared to Coke. So, close rivals, which can be seen through the value of XED, large XED means interrelated goods, may want to also match each other in terms of the marketing strategy. So, second usefulness of XED is in terms of marketing strategy. Lastly, government can also find XED to be very useful when it comes to implication of taxes on interrelated goods. For example, the government decides to put a tax on petrol, then it can have a serious implication in terms of the demand for cars, because a larger tax on petrol would mean people will be deciding to buy less cars, which means demand for cars will fall, and that may mean there will be implication in terms of employment of the car industry, in terms of contribution uh, of the car industry in terms of GDP, all will get impacted. So, from a government perspective, knowing the XED is very useful, because then they would know how their taxes or how their policies on one sector can affect an interrelated sector.